Hi, everybody. Oh man, I feel the nerves, just like we were live together. My name's Mel Haig. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Canadian Stage, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the first event of the Festival of Ideas and Creation. I'm joining you from my living room. I've spent a lot of time in this living room in the last little while. Yeah, this apartment building, I've lived here now maybe 3 years, and it celebrated its 35th anniversary this year, and there's a lady who lives down the hall with me who's lived here for 35 years, which I think is awesome. Since I was a kid, I've never lived anywhere like this, which is kind of a community. There's a lot of families and older folks and multi-generational families living in different units, and living in Toronto, that's not something I always experience. So it's been kind of an interesting note to my quarantine, is living as part of a community and thinking about what that feels like, because before I was never home, and so never really had the chance to meet my neighbors like this. And I say that, but quarantine has been incredibly difficult for me and for all of us. I miss my family, I miss my friends, I miss the outside, and I miss all of you. I miss this moment between us with an audience. My place is pretty close to the Don River, so I have a lot of water in my life, or I get to pass by water. And we're all in our spaces right now. We're all connected to something. There is a ground underneath us. And even though when we're online, we're connecting from so many different spaces, I think it's really important to know that without the technology happens because of the land, and the land happens because of the stewardship of the peoples, in particular Indigenous peoples, to give us this space that we are able to share together. And with that spirit, I'd like to acknowledge, welcome, and celebrate the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and all other nations, recorded and unrecorded, acknowledged and unacknowledged, who have been the stewards of this place that, in this time, I feel so lucky to call my home, and so indebted to the land that I stand upon. Welcome to the Festival of Ideas and Creation. The festival has been a lot of things over many years. It's been a space for presentations of new work, for artistic thought and discourse. And now in this moment, what I need is to develop my own curiosity, to develop my own hope, and to build that ever-learning part of myself that reaches out towards as many sources as possible to find artistic imagination. So the program that we have put together, which will be started today, I hope will help foster that curiosity in all of us about all things. And I'd like to thank you so much for taking your time with us. I'd like to now introduce our guest for this afternoon's talk, Dr. Duke Redbird. Hey, bud. Still got the nerves. I'm alone in my living room. I'm still nervy. So Dr. Duke is an elder, a poet, activist, educator, and artist. With a legacy stretching back to the 1960s, he's a pillar of First Nations literature in Canada and has practiced a number of art disciplines, including poetry, painting, theater, and film. He was a trailblazer throughout the 60s and 70s, giving voice to Indigenous peoples at major institutions and folk festivals across the country. From 1994 to 2009, he was an arts and entertainment reporter for City TV in Toronto. He holds a master's degree from York University and received an honorary doctorate from the Ontario College of Art. Dr. Duke Redbird is also featured on Native North America and received a Grammy Award nomination for the Best Historical Album in 2015. A Grammy, my goodness. Duke recently recorded his poem, The Power of Land, with the Sultans of Strings. He occupies the position as the elder with the following organizations: Myseum Toronto, the Toronto Biennial, Summerworks, Toronto's Arts Council's Banff Leaders Lab, and his artist-in-residence with the Urban Indigenous Education Centre at the Toronto District School Board. We are so lucky to have you join us this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. I want to say Ani, Bojo, Sego, ingredients, and welcome to everybody. And I'm so delighted to be here this afternoon. And I'm not going to say too much except jump right in and explain to everybody that the theme of today's talk is a dish with one spoon, I call it, and it's framed in 4 categories.
Well, here, let me introduce Audra before we land too much.
Yeah, all right.
Audra Santa will be our moderator for today. Hi, Audra. I can feel you going. So Audra Santa is a musician, moderator, and media woman, a creative communicator who acts as a bridge between worlds. Audra loves to create spaces for stories, to unveil truths and conversations, to deepen connection. She has hosted and produced interviews, podcasts, and videos, including elevating Indigenous voices as the host of DWF Live. As a musical artist, her multidisciplinary work embodies soul and sensuality. She also works as an intuitive and spiritual mentor, also applying layers of study in psychology, health, and spirituality to support others on their journey. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I feel I don't know how I feel about ever cutting Duke off to be introduced, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to sit in conversation with you again, Duke, and to learn and to have an opportunity again to just absorb some of that wisdom and being part of the Festival of Ideas and Creation with Canadian Stage. This is super exciting. And for everybody tuning in, I mean, what an incredible time for us to gather virtually, but to feel like we're in circle together. And so the reason I'm here, and just to, because of me popping up, is to help support the conversation and the discussion with Duke. So after Duke provides his keynote speech that he first delivered to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, he is going to take a little break, and then we are going to come back for Q&A. And when we do that, I'll have the incredible privilege of being able to deliver your questions to Duke and to help that conversation to flow. And it really is just such an incredible and exciting honor to be here. So for all of those that are here, and as we're about to hand it over to Duke, a few things just to keep in mind. If you do have any questions, you can, and you're watching on YouTube, you can put your questions in YouTube at any time, and Mel and the Canadian Stage team will feed that through to us. After Duke delivers his address, we are going to take a 5-minute break. There will be a timer. And at that time, we're also going to play a video called Power of the Land that Duke did with Sultans of String and Twin Flames. So we'll provide you with that link to watch if you choose, and then we'll come back for the Q&A. But the most important thing I would like to offer and to share with you that is going to make this session even better is to listen with open ears and an open heart. Because there is so much wisdom that Duke carries. There's so much that he has amassed over as many years as a poet, an activist, an artist, a broadcaster, but most importantly, as a wisdom keeper. And what I'm seeing from the theme of the Festival of Ideas and Creation is there's a lot about wisdom. There's a lot of plant wisdom. There's things that we're talking about. The power of the land, really, and self-care and how we can care for each other. And I know that this is going to be a really rich experience for us all. So I don't want to take any more time on stage. I just want to say hello to everyone. But nice to connect with you. And Duke, we are just so blessed and honored to be able to receive from you today. So thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech. I feel a little bit like having jumped in the canoe and pushed off the dock and then looked around and said, oh, wait a second. Now there.
Oh, no, it's okay. See, I can swim. I've been swimming really well since I was a little girl. And I will come and hang on the end of the canoe and ride it all the way home.
You did a great job today, that's for sure. Well, we'll swim right into it. And again, thank you everyone for being here today and taking some time out of your busy schedule to share, as I share with you and you share with me, a talk that I want to deliver, and it's called A Dish with One Spoon. And it's framed, like I was mentioning before, in 4 categories. I call it the blink of an eye, otherwise known as the Big Bang, that delivered the gift of the universe to us, and the stroke of a pen that enabled the European colonial empires to take it all away and erase our culture, basically. And then there was the click of the mouse, which is technology which we have acquired that will allow us to retrieve our freedom, our culture and traditions, and the speed of light, the acceleration necessary to guarantee a viable future for everyone on this planet. A dish with one spoon. It's a term used traditionally by Indigenous peoples to describe an agreement between separate communities of nations. It put parameters around the sharing of essential resources that were delivered by the Creator in the blink of an eye, known as the Big Bang. Think of it this way. All people who occupy this planet are eating from a single dish called Mother Earth. One spoon signifies that all living creatures share the resources that are contained in this one dish. And we are all expected to limit our consumption of the resources so that enough is always left for other creatures and humans included. This comprehension ensured that continued vitality of Mother Earth and all her offsprings into the future. It's traditional to always start with a land acknowledgement. And in keeping with this tradition, I wrote this poem called A Dish with One Spoon. It's a land acknowledgement for the treaty lands where I live here in Toronto. And it goes like this. The Indigenous nations welcomed settlers from across the seas when they arrived in their territories. Such beauty revealed before their eyes was beyond their ability to describe. In all the languages that the settlers spoke, there were no words that could evoke with any clarity a single thought that Mother Nature's splendor brought. It was from the Indigenous tongues that the settlers learned the language of the earth in all her idioms. Toronto from Takaranto, trees standing in the water, a meeting place where small fish could gather. Nearby hills where alders grow, that was called Etobicoke. And in the autumn, before the winter snows, the passenger pigeons rested in Mimico. And to the west, where the great waters flow, the lake and lands were called Ontario. Now the eagle soars high with prayers for Manitou. The Mississauga Nation launch and smudge their birch bark canoes. Three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. The planting season has begun. Tobacco is offered, a gift to grandfather's son. Sage, sweetgrass, and cedar to grandmother moon. There is peace, joy, and harmony in the treaty lands called A Dish with One Spoon. For the Indigenous peoples, the hierarchy of creation starts with Mother Earth. She is central to existence, and we believe that she is sacred. The plants and vegetation come next, and They are empowered with the gift of healing, feeding us, and inspiring us with visions. The creatures who have achieved their evolutionary perfection are teachers who guide us on our journey toward our ultimate destination as human beings. Since Indigenous peoples were hunters and gatherers, our relationship to the universe was on a mythic or a spiritual level. We understand that we function as all creatures do, and that when we are born, our primary drive is to be social. Babies seek attachment, companionship, affection, intimacy, and have an impactive capacity for empathy. In the Indigenous world, those characteristics were allowed to mature. And the communities we lived in were motivated by creative imagination that fosters the arts and self-preservation rather than competition, materialism, power, or money. Indigenous people know that, as we all do, that we have but one life, that every moment is fragile, and that it is a challenge to exist. Our life is unrepeatable, and each of us have our own personal history on this earth. We develop empathy when we experience another human being and understand that every moment of the day is a combination of death and a celebration of life. For 93% of the time that humans have existed on this planet, we lived as foragers, hunters, and gatherers. However, unlike humans on other continents that had domesticated animals as an energy source, the Indigenous people in the Americas did not domesticate animals. We did not invent the plowshare to dig the land. In fact, when Indigenous people first saw horses tilling the land, many were aghast that the sharp blade of the plow was cutting into the Mother Earth. The best example of how Indigenous peoples cultivated an agricultural food source can be seen through the planting practices of corn, bean, and squash, known as the Three Sisters. This method has been called companion planting, where each plant helps the other to survive. 3 seeds were planted together in mounds of soil in a trinity of cooperation on the surface of the earth. We now know that the benefit of this type of agriculture is that no carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere, and so it ensures the vitality of the soil from one generation to the next. We do not have to use pesticides because the microbiosphere of the earth contained a diversity of organisms that were all connected and related. As a result, our agriculture was self-fertilizing and self-propagating. Humans created language to organize themselves socially for survival and a social life. Indigenous people had acquired something called mythical consciousness, which allowed them to follow a spiritual pathway to human development instead of a physical one. I'd like to quote Dr. Leroy Littlebear, is Professor Emeritus from the University of Lethbridge. And he writes, in Aboriginal philosophy, experience consists of energy. The Indigenous people concluded that the world is composed of an intelligent energy that pervades everything. It gives it mobility and imparts a specific knowledge to each species and entity. We also saw the presence of personality in the universe. The motivation for accumulating great wealth and power through political institutions was absent in our pre-contact communities. Our work was dedicated to self-preservation and the arts. The only reason for Indigenous people to get up in the morning before contact with the settlers was for the pursuit of food and shelter and the raising of the family. Romance was satisfied through the arts, music, dance, and nature. Social interaction, seeking understanding of the environment, and the wisdom of nature fell under the category of self-preservation. We had no concept of money, no organized institutions of power. Also, the absence of a written language meant the absence of schools, academies, colleges, guilds, and universities. Yet our people were very learned and had knowledge of the flora and fauna of the continent that matched the perceptions of the most informed scientists of our day. How is this possible? We know that the early settlers were dependent upon the experience and proficiency of the indigenous nations. Yet, the Europeans were mystified how a people without traditional European-style education could acquire such sophisticated knowledge. The answer was, and still is to this day, profound by virtue of its simplicity. It has been said that education is the ability to assemble information strategically to accomplish goals. Wisdom, on the other hand, is the ability to choose the correct goals. Wisdom is not a topic that is taught or studied in the curriculum of our schools or universities, nor is it a practice in modern life. Technology can put a man in space, or a microcomputer or nanobot in every creature on Earth. Yet technology cannot answer the last question that should ever be asked of anything. And it's an Indigenous question. Is it wise? The cultures of the Middle East, some 4,000 years ago, organized themselves around monoculture farming. These were practices. And the expansions of single crop plantations led to both the domestication of animals and human slavery. Indigenous cultures, on the other hand, lived in harmony with the land. And we knew from time immemorial that their survival and sustainability depended upon a symbiotic relationship with nature. We learned to change ourselves to suit nature rather than attempt, as the empires of the old world had done, to change nature to suit themselves. The colonial powers from Europe brought with them in 1492 what they believed to be an infallible truth. This truth, delivered by their God, was that all humans are born with original sin, and that only Christians are entitled to have dominion over the earth and all her manifold resources. This was and is in direct opposition to the indigenous cultures who had no notion whatsoever of Judeo-Christian ideas. Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island were inherently motivated to live in harmony with Mother Nature. The indigenous world has an enlightened and symbiotic relationship with nature. Prior to colonial contact, the energy we used was freely obtained from the earth, sun, wind, water, and geothermal heat. We were socially sophisticated. We engaged in trade and good governance without a written language, without books and libraries, without schools and universities, without civil and religious institutions, without kings, armies, police forces, magistrates, judges, or prisons, without coins, currency, banks, and without concepts of deeded land ownership, without factories, guilds, and poorhouses. Yet we maintained orderly social structures, interacted and traded with our neighbors, raised our young, honored our old. In short, we clothed, fed, sheltered, and doctored ourselves without taxes or organized enforcement agencies to ensure adherence to the rules. Our energy sources were available to everyone and were delivered by the Creator in the blink of an eye. Agricultural and carbon-based societies require currency, banks, factories, guilds, and poorhouses, none of which were present or conceived as necessary in an indigenous world that lived with a concept of a dish with one spoon. The settlers who arrived here 400 years ago bought and sold land, animals, and people. They used money and power in their desire to acquire indigenous lands, and they did not have the same relationship with our Mother Earth. We invited the settlers to live amongst us and share the land and resources with a dish with one spoon. The European powers, however, used the doctrine of discovery to justify their unscrupulous occupation of our lands and territories. The doctrine of discovery was issued by Pope Alexander VI in 1493. It was used to justify colonial claims on land and waterways and promoted Christian dominion and superiority. The fake news of the day was that indigenous people were savages, barbarians, inferior, and uncivilized, among other constructs the colonizers used to subjugate, dominate, and exploit the lands, territories, and resources of the indigenous peoples. The colonial powers, through the stroke of a pen, distorted the history of Turtle Island. They taught that when the settlers arrived, North America was virtually empty, except for a few tribes of nomadic peoples who had wandered across the Bering Strait from outer Mongolia after the last ice age. This biased and misleading characterization of the indigenous world served the initiatives of conquest and control of the continent. The stroke of a pen taught that my ancestors were Stone Age peoples who had not evolved through the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the Atomic Age. The stroke of a pen told us that we were a primitive people. And in some texts, we were even called savages. the stroke of a pen, taught that the colonial powers of Europe had superior technology, civilization, knowledge, and were following the Darwinian evolutionary theory of the survival of the fittest. The indigenous people living in the Americas already knew that we are human beings living in one biosphere with all other living creatures. We had been living in a miracle of creation, in a symbiotic relationship with nature from the beginning of time. When the empires of the Middle East developed around the great river systems of the Tigris and Euphrates and Nile valleys, a great division took place. Through agricultural energy, sourcing the great empires of the Middle East became dependent upon the utilitarian and competitive nature embedded in the left hemispheres of their brains, at the expense of empathy, creativity, and imagination rooted in the right side of the brain. This did not happen in the Americas. Hunters-gatherers lived directly from the energy of the earth, unlike agricultural societies that produce their energy from barley, oats, and wheat, which necessitated organizing large groups into patriarchal hierarchies and acquiring all the tools associated with protecting the storage of energies produced by agriculture. The agricultural societies of the Middle East became increasingly more complex, and they devised a tool called money to enable the marketing of the products of their agriculture. As the agricultural communities grew into cities and nations, they established the idea of writing, which enabled them to transport and mobilize information as well as their products. As villages evolved and became cities, nations, and empires, the world moved into fossil fuels to create technologies that would do the work of humans and animals. At one time, the climate would determine production, but with the Industrial Revolution, the climate became irrelevant. The burning of fossil fuels to produce energy is not climate dependent. The indigenous populations continued to follow the symbiotic relationship with nature and the natural cycles of life, utilizing their imagination, invention, innovation, and creativity over utilitarian exploitation of the land and resources through the establishment of institutions of money and power. Europeans who 200 years ago entered into what they called the Age of Enlightenment for themselves from what they considered their own dark ages, ironically forced the indigenous enlightened occupants of the Americas into what can only be called the indigenous dark ages. The colonizers brought horses and weapons of aggression to support their so-called enlightened conquest of the New World. This in turn caused the indigenous people to abandon their traditions of tend and mend and adopt the fight or flight tactics of their oppressors. Warrior societies evolved in order to defend the land and liberties that were being taken by the stroke of a pen through treaties and legislation. The lingering effects of that period in history are still affecting the emotions and sensibilities of the indigenous peoples of today. And now, 200 years later, with the imminent climate crisis, the dominant culture is seeking the enlightened wisdom of the indigenous experience to rescue all of us from certain annihilation caused by Western ideas that disconnected their populations from the biosphere and from their fellow creatures on Earth. The indigenous people realized Mother Nature is an information platform and organized their communities using the same templates that were gifted by Mother Earth in the beginning, namely biochemistry and biocircuitry as nature created them. The indigenous communities understood that our body is a replication of Mother Earth. It was from the earth and the information she provided that we learned that all organs and brains included were created in order for the body to survive. The body is constantly calculating and assembling information, which results in feelings that instantaneously manifest in emotions of courage, fear, or confusion in men, and manifests in women a desire to tend and mend. Keen insight can be described as intuition that has been sequestered in our blood memory over many generations that ensured our survival when it was triggered by our relationship to nature. A wise brain examines a variety of options and then acquires a consensus, which allows a decision to be made that will ensure the survival of the individual. If we compare our brain to Mother Earth, she functions the same way. She considers all the options available because everything is related, and she keeps the wise decisions and discards the rest, knowing that all decisions will affect all other areas of life. Western civilization, since the Industrial Revolution that started in 1760, has tried to find a template that will harness nature to suit the whims of human beings. What a bad idea. There are things that modern technology will never be able to do. We're headed toward a world where people are being partially programmed by algorithms. In the past, indigenous people were programmed by our symbiotic relationship with the earth. Today, a lot of what the average person will do will be designed, set up, contextualized, and motivated by algorithms rather than by nature. Technology and social networks are creating an electronic retribalization on a global level with the click of a mouse. We are creating a globe of villages as opposed to a global village. The downside is that the global villages may be designed by surveillance capitalists persuading us to become better consumers of products by mining our interior arenas. The upside is that we have an opportunity now to share from the indigenous communities around the world a long tradition of living in communion with nature and bringing that sensitivity and sustainability into the modern world. In this era of multivarious platforms of information, let us not forget that the origin of all knowledge and wisdom comes from a platform called Mother Earth. Since she's always mutating and evolving and always in a state of flux, this process has been passed on to indigenous communities who replicated Mother Nature and as a result are also mutating, evolving, and in a state of flux. The settlers brought a culture from across the oceans that considered that the earth was put here for the sole purpose of being mined and commodified by human beings. Indigenous people have always had a culture that recognized human survival depended upon a symbiotic relationship with nature. Our purpose was always to care for Mother Nature and cherish her benevolence. I think I can safely say that historically, the Indigenous people have never triggered an environmental crisis. I think I could argue that the environmental crisis that we're experiencing today and that the youth are marching against was brought upon us by the pursuit of money and power and corporations who have been mining our interior arenas and selling us products that we don't want or need. It was Einstein who said, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." If that's the case, surveillance capitalism is not going to save us from a dismal future. We must re-examine our values and begin to nurture 4 of the things that make us happy and human: innovation, invention, creativity, and imagination. The mind is organized matter, a system with various functions like memory, generated by chemical and electrical processes that science and humans know practically nothing about. When you interpret thinking and language, you will find that the expressions that you articulate to yourself come instantaneously, demonstrating that there was pre-conscious indication of a thought before you could articulate it. The language you speak will influence your perceptions and interpretations of the world. We now know that most Indigenous languages are verb-based and have a fluidity that allows the flow of thoughts and ideas to correspond to the flowing of a river rather than carved in stone. For example, we find that most Indigenous languages do not have the word why. You can describe how something happened, what happened, where it happened, but not why it happened. If there was a notion of why, it was always expressed as a great mystery associated with creation and spirituality. Another feature of Indigenous languages is the absence of either and or. The fluidity of the Indigenous languages allowed for both options to be embedded in the one idea, always. Nowadays, we see this capacity of either and or being one and the same in quantum computing, which is a leap forward from the binary computing of the past. Functioning without the bias of comparative value, such as up being more valuable than down or good being more valuable than bad. Binary Latin-based languages from Europe separated the world into categories of either and or. Indigenous languages and communities function without these biases, so that we cannot describe them by a patriarchal or matriarchal definition of community. Babies are born social and acquire language from their parents. If the language that the parents are using emphasizes and communicates affection, intimacy, attachment, love, and empathy, it will nurture and support the maturity of those instinctive traits in the adult. However, if these innate characteristics are repressed by binary biases in the language the child is directed toward, separation, judgment, materialism, and narcissism, which can result in aggression, violence, and bullying. If a child learns language with fixed concepts carved in stone, so to speak, with the concepts of either or, they perceive their world as separate, categorized, and partisan. However, if the language flows like a river, as it does in indigenous languages, the child doesn't question and judge everything based on an either or bias, but rather recognizes the reality that all options are as in nature, are available experiences in life. Since indigenous languages were non-binary, it was impossible to conceive of and create the world of Judeo-Christian, Greek, Latin-based civilizations. The indigenous world before contact was motivated by self-preservation and romance as expressed through the arts, and not by money and power that was expressed through acquiring dominion over the earth and all her resources. The source of this wisdom came from the intelligent energy of creation that pervades everything. In other words, indigenous energy sources were spiritual, not carbon-based. Through imagination, creativity, innovation, and invention, indigenous Turtle Islanders can reclaim at the speed of light the wisdom of their ancestors and share it with all the world. Fossil fuels, coal and nuclear power are old technologies that need to be replaced by new technologies, which ironically are the original energy sources that the indigenous people have used since time immemorial. The wind, the sun, tidal waves, and geothermal energies. These energies are free and don't produce pollution. Prior to contact, indigenous people were using the energy of the water to travel by birch bark canoes, the energy of the wind to control forest fires, the energy of the sun to grow plants, and geothermal energies like hot springs to warm their homes and heal their bodies. Now, every generation of humans is given the opportunity to experience the meaning of life, so that when we arrive in the spirit world, we will journey with all of creation to a manifested destiny of unconditional love. Dr. Bruce Lipton, an American developmental biologist, refers to it as a process of metamorphosis, similar to how a larva changes its chemical structure to become a caterpillar and then a butterfly. Humanity could be metaphorically referred to as a larva that became a caterpillar 4,000 years ago. The advent of agriculture, money, and writing created a ravenous appetite to consume and destroy everything in its path. Nature, in its wisdom, at a critical time in its existence, assigned the caterpillar to a chrysalis, which created a metamorphosis for the caterpillar to emerge as a butterfly with no carbon imprint whatsoever on the face of the earth. The chemical structure of the caterpillar was repurposed and redirected. Nature today is suffering an environmental crisis caused by the overuse of fossil fuels and is signaling to us that it is time to enter into a chrysalis type of restructuring, repurposing, and realignment of our values and consciousness so that we, like the caterpillar, may emerge into the future as sensitive as a butterfly. In this world today, 8 trillionaires alone control and have the same wealth as 1/2 of the population of the world. They use centralized energy resources protected by the military organizations and corporations to squeeze the very life out of human existence. Turtle Islanders intuitively knew 400 years ago that the settlers were peculiar, not unlike what is described by Joseph Henrich in his new book, The Weirdest People in the World, weird being an acronym for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. A mindset that could not be understood by Indigenous people because we had our own acronym called human, humble, useful, magnanimous, abundant, and natural. This was specifically articulated in a speech by the great Indigenous leader and warrior Black Hawk during the War of 1812. I quote, this is what he said. The Great Spirit gave us a world that was composed of the finest and best land for our home and use. The woods and prairies teemed with buffalo, moose, elk, bear, and deer, with other game suitable for our enjoyment, while the lakes, rivers, creeks, and ponds were alive with the very best kinds of fish for our food. The islands were our gardens, where the Great Spirit caused berries, plums, and other fruits to grow in great abundance, while the soil, when cultivated, produced corn, bean, pumpkin, squash of the finest and largest quantities. Our children never were known to cry of hunger, and no stranger, red or white, was permitted to enter our lodges without finding food and rest. The Great Spirit created this country for the use and benefit of his children and placed them all in full possession of it, and we were happy and contented. Unquote. Since Indigenous languages were non-binary, without concepts of institutions of power and money, it was impossible to conceive of and create the weird world of Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic systems. The weird people took our definition of a human world away. But now we can have this all back at the speed of light by reclaiming all the energies that were given to us in the blink of an eye: wind, solar, water, and geothermal. Energies that are freely given by nature and can be shared as in a dish with one spoon. As songwriters John Lennon and Yoko Ono wrote in a song called Imagine in 1971. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. When this song topped the charts around the globe, the technology did not exist to bring the world that John Lennon imagined into existence. But it does now. The generation of the 21st century has the means to construct the architecture that could only be imagined in John Lennon's day. The world John Lennon imagined did not exist in the Americas, or did exist in the Americas before contact with the weird people. We lived in a world without greed or hunger, a world that was a community of humans. We relied upon an energy of intelligence and spirit. Our dreams were mythic and were balanced equally between the journeys that we took in our sleeping state and the river of life that we navigated every day. As humans, we journey from the source of creation at birth into the flood of consciousness and the river of existence to eventually be birthed into eternity. the generation of humans born in the 21st century have a task unlike any that has faced humanity since the beginning of time, one that is strewn with peril, for the very salvation of human existence depends on their success. That task is to replace the collective consciousness of the entire world from weird, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic to human, humble, useful, magnanimous, abundant, and natural in one generation. It is imperative that the children of the 21st century have access to a worldview that celebrates the idea of a compassionate communion with all living things. We want the generation of the future to apply the traditional values and wisdom of our ancestors and uphold a sacred covenant to family, community, and nature. It is incumbent upon the speed of light generation, born after 1995, to explore an Indigenous worldview and use technologies to change negative patterns and rethink the manner in which we engage the environment. It will be the children of the 21st century who have been educated to understand the need to protect the earth and of their own volition choose to use available technology to enhance their lives, recognizing that the future of all existence and humankind is dependent upon a robust and sacred relationship with Mother Earth. In the world before COVID-19, we were captive of the surveillance capitalists who were mining the interior arenas of our personalities, developing algorithms that were designed to sell us products that we didn't want or need. We were the ones who bought their products. Nobody forced us to give our money to corporations. They convinced us that we needed them. But what the COVID pandemic has taught us is that all along what we really needed was what makes us human: a healthy environment, connection, empathy, affection, and love. Now we have the opportunity to construct the architecture of the future through information sharing that is open sourced and in partnership with nature. We can use our agency to retrieve our freedom that we abandoned when we were educated to live in a weird world governed by weird people. Let us covenant today with one another and with our Mother, the Earth, that our primary goal in life will be for the collective stewardship of this beautiful blue planet and not for individual profit. Let us use our technology to connect with one another in empathy, affection, attachment, companionship, and intimacy, as we were ordained to do when we were born. In short, let us retrieve with the speed of light the gift from the universe that our Indigenous ancestors described as the dish with one spoon. In closing, I'd like to share a video of a poem called The Power of the Land. Miigwech.
Duke, thank you so much. What a powerful address, and everything that you shared there made me think, made me cry a little, and I'm sure for many others as well. So miigwech, and we are really, really honored to have been able to kick off the Festival of Ideas and Creation with that incredible keynote. We are going to take a 5-minute break. That'll give us all an opportunity just to absorb and sit with some of what you said, and for people to think of questions that they might like to ask you. And in that time, just as you said, we're going to actually share a link to The Power of the Land with Sultans of String and Twin Flames. So if you are watching on YouTube, you can open your browser window or open another browser window, put that link in there if you'd like to watch that video during the break. Canadian Stage is going to put up a timer for 5 minutes, and we're all just going to take a little breather there. And for anyone who has some questions, please pop them in the chat on YouTube, and we will be able to bring them back to Elder Dr. Duke Redbird. And I'm so excited about the conversation that's about to happen. So thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back. Hi, Duke.
Hi.
Oh, we had a chance to take a breather there. You know, sometimes we spend so much time in front of these screens, so it's an opportunity for us to just step away and then come back fresh, excited to hear more from you.
Well, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. What a world, eh, with this technology and us being able to have a conversation like this instead of, you know, at Wigwam Chuchimang last summer, you spoke to so many down at the waterfront. And now here we are having these conversations virtually, but reaching many, many more people. And in the questions, or rather in your talk, you talked a lot about how, you know, even technology, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, that there's so many good things that can come, but it can also be used for negative. There's a question about wondering how we can actually really focus on our own positive experience or positive ways of contributing in the days of social media and online communication.
Well, what I is the a good deal of time now is spent coping with the manner in which we've been educated and the manner in which we've been parented. The uh, the the world that we presently live in was created by the imaginations of people who lived 200 years ago, for the most part, and and you know, the focus at that time was to exploit uh, a world of fossil fuels, a world of, of controlling populations and people and so on. This has to change. We have to repurpose and reconstruct and redirect the manner in which we raise our children, number one, and the manner in which we educate children. Like uh, the idea that one half of the population of the earth should be subject to the um, exploitation of the other half of the population, and particularly when it comes to the you know, the 8 families on Earth who control 50% of control the exact amount of money that 50% is of the purchasing power of 50% of the entire world is controlled by 8 families. That seems so out of balance with everything that we believe in, with a dish with one spoon, that all the resources of the planet Earth were put here for the purpose of leading us from that little spark of life that we all begin with, and we are housed in a biochemical field of chemistry and biochemical energies. We aren't created like robots. We have a pure mythic spiritual relationship with the earth that has served humanity since the beginning of time. It's only been the last 4,000 to 6,000 years that things went off the rails. But I think we can use the technology that we have now to reimagine a world that is completely different from the world that was created in the last 4,000 years, and we can do it very quickly if we just repurpose, reimagine, and redistribute the knowledge that we have in that we are born with, that is part of our natural human um, response to something called life.
A thing called life, eh?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I anytime I hear you speak, but in particular in this speech, I was really impacted by what you were sharing around Mother Earth and her wisdom and Indigenous wisdom and worldviews. And you shared how this is a time that, you know, technology is allowing us to allow this to reach far and wide. And even now, I mean, there's people watching from all over. They'll be able to watch the replay. We also have, I know on the Festival of Ideas and Creation this time, they have Joe Pitawanakwet from Creator's Garden, who will be talking about the wisdom of plants, as well as Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. So there's a lot of like the interest in that. And I guess my question, or I'm curious myself, oh, actually, never mind my question. I have a question here that came through on my Instagram. I'm going to find that because it's related to this. Josette asked, she asked what you do right now to honor nature in our modern age, and what can we do in our current spaces to practice honoring the earth?
Well, the first thing in terms of honoring the earth is to and I have a very simple thing that I use in my own life, and I recognize that nature is sacred, and so when I'm in the sacred, I don't bring anything profane into the sacred, because I consider what we have, the manner in which we've exploited nature is profane. So the city is very profane in relationship to the sacredness of nature. So what the best that we can do today is that when we're in nature, let's not profane it. And when we're in the profane, let us bring some of that nature into the profane. And that's easily done. It's as simple as planting a garden, and it doesn't even have to be a full garden. It can be in a pot on your balcony, but giving that relationship of engagement with the world of living things, and recognizing that the difference between all that is natural is that we recognize the difference between the natural and the unnatural is only the natural suffers. And realizing that only the natural suffers, then we need to develop that kind of empathy to the fact that as we suffer, so does the plant, so does the tree, so does the soil, so does the earth. But in that suffering, there is another side of it, which is the capacity to enter into a place of enlightenment, of changing in from the caterpillar that devours everything in its path to the butterfly that enjoys the bounty of a universe that is the miracle of life. So keeping that in mind, we have this capacity to build garages for our cars while the human beings are sleeping in tents on the ground out and so the cars have have garages fit for a king, and our own human brothers and sisters right here in Toronto are sleeping on the street, and yet on the same street that they're sleeping on, the car is protected and taken care of and polished and oiled and maintenance and housed in a sometimes a better accommodation for the car than most people's housing. How does that compute with us? So when I'm asked the question, how do I, on a living in the heart of the profane, how do I manage to maintain some sanity? It's because I actually have put a little greenhouse on my balcony and have an opportunity to engage with living plants, and that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I've just started to have plants in my apartment because now I'm in one that has a lot more light, and I've found during this quarantine time and lockdown that I speak to plants a lot, partly because I'm often alone. But that light. Yeah, it's nourishing for all of us, for the plants and for me. And I loved as you were talking about the butterfly and the caterpillar. And just this year, I found out something new about that whole process of metamorphosis. I didn't realize that when the caterpillar creates a chrysalis, that it essentially turns into caterpillar soup before it degrades to nothing almost before it becomes a butterfly. And I'm kind of thinking that 2020 is a bit of a year like that. I feel like we're all becoming this soup in our little cocoons. Yeah. And I'm curious what you think about how we can come out this year ready to fly like butterflies.
Well, it's going to be very, very difficult because we're going to go through some difficult times experiencing the labor pains of giving birth to a new idea. But it must come because we have a very short time. If we were to continue to go down the path that we're on, the sustainability of the earth is at the breaking point. And the thing is that the earth will go on forever. The earth doesn't need human beings to survive, but human beings need the earth for us to survive. And if this life form called a human being is going to have a future, then we have to take care of the planet and all things in it. And I must say, there's seems to be of two minds here in the collective consciousness of the world. There's those of us who are trying to save the planet as best as we can, and then there's other very powerful energies that are trying to leave the planet as quickly as possible and set up colonies on Mars and other moons of the other planets, satellites. So it seems like there's this. On the one hand, there is a portion of the human spirit that is saying, we're not going to be able to continue to live on this planet under the conditions that's coming. So they're going to leave. Or there's going to be other things that will happen. Like the indigenous people had no idea that you could buy and sell land. It never occurred to the indigenous mind that land could be sold. However, with the stroke of a pen, the Western empire builders found a way to have to buy and sell land. Now, we accepted that, and then we all accepted the fact that, well, water is free. It comes from the universe, and we don't have to buy water. And then one day, we find out that Nestle's is able to buy the aquifer and put it in plastic and sell us water. And we've pretty well all accepted that, well, this is okay. We can sell the land, we can sell the water. Now with this pandemic, there will be companies, I predict, who are going to have bottles of air that they will sell us because we can't breathe the air because of the viruses that are layering up because of how we have engaged the earth. So if we're not careful, we're going to have to purchase all that the universe delivered to us freely. But we don't have to go that route. We have people watching this talk of mine today who have imaginations, who have creativity, who understand that they can imagine a different world. And there's stages upon, like these platforms, where we can share this information with each other, and we can have a democracy that is horizontal, not vertical. We have mobility of information and sharing and everything that encompasses the entire planet. And we can begin to think about how do we love the earth that has given us life, and how can we have a kind of a manifested all the best possible categories of what it means to be alive and human and at wonder with the miracle that we're all a part of, as opposed to watching Warcraft on a video game, teaching us how to blow things up and kill things and put that into our minds instead of other notions of that we were born with, which is social and a desire to be kind and empathetic.
And see, these are things we can choose, right? Yeah. We can choose to have that in our mind. And I really appreciate as well how you were talking about the fluidity of Indigenous languages, but also like the either or, the kind of binary of making those choices, how we're able to now see that expressed, not just like we're hoping that it'll be expressed more in culture, but digitally. When you mentioned instead of just the binary computing, like quantum computing, that now, you know, is creating possibilities we didn't even know we had before. And there's a question that came through on YouTube that says, well, first of all, says, thank you so much, Duke. Are there some specific technologies that you have seen that are helping us to rethink our connections?
The one that I think has impacted most is YouTube. When the younger generation realized that they don't have to be held captive to big corporations in order to express their creativity, like through music, for instance, is you know, the garage band can actually produce music and have access to audiences that at one time, you had to sign a contract with a big record label in order to get your music out there. Well, that's over with. Now we have these possibilities, and this pandemic has taught so many of us to have little video and television studios right in our living rooms, and and we are learning how to communicate with all of this wonderful technology in a way that wasn't available 20 years ago, or so we have the tool. How do we use it? It's like when fire was discovered, it had the capacity to burn down the forest, or it could keep us warm and cook our meals. So we have to understand that it's not about fight or flight. It's about tend and mend. We can take the attitude, we're going to tend to this Mother Earth of ours, and we're going to mend this Mother Earth of ours, and we're going to tend to our children, and we're going to mend the bad parenting and bad education that our forefathers passed on to us. We don't have to be fear and fight for something or run from it. We don't. We can have that what in Indigenous communities recognized as it's the nurturing side of the natural human that is most personified in mothers, in women who in their capacity to tend to the family and to have that direction that men need to be more conscious of and to work with, and so on. And I'm glad to see in the United States that Biden has got so many women in his cabinet as he's making these choices. And I believe they're going to tend to the business of what we've gone through for the last little while and begin to mend the relationships in the United States. It's just a natural thing, and I think that's part of the process. And as far as men goes, we have to do what we do best, which is support, build, and protect. And so there's that symbiotic relationship between human beings that we also have with nature.
Beautiful. And in the tending and mending, like with relationships, one of the things that's big topic of conversation, and we've talked about a lot across Turtle Island, is reconciliation and, restoring or helping to create better relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And there was a question here, and I'll take this as our final question, okay, as we wrap up. But the question that came through from Josette says, I'd like to ask how Duke feels about the current Canadian content in the news, on the stage, TV and film, and their portrayal of Indigenous peoples. Where does Duke see strengths and weaknesses in those images?
Well, let me begin by saying that we talk about reconciliation, but before we can get to reconciliation, we must have truth. So the truth has been left out of the mix, and people are concentrating on reconciliation, And in the Indigenous community, we're saying reconciliation. How about reconciliation? And there isn't any. You know, I just saw a report day before yesterday where 84% of the Indigenous people that go for treatment in the hospitals in BC are experiencing racism of the worst kind. We have in Northern Ontario, Tanya Talaga, a great journalist and writer, and someone I admire and respect. She points out that the territory north of Thunder Bay is as large as France. Has 69 Indigenous communities up there and only one school. But no one seems to twig to these things. In 1867, when Confederation took place, no one ever from the dominant culture invited Indigenous people to participate in Confederation. We didn't get a seat at the table to say, well, it's not a French and English nation. It's also the land. The Indigenous people should be the third party at the table. They didn't do it then. They still haven't done it now. So the question being, the portrayal of Indigenous people is still incredibly distorted. They're asking now for that the Indigenous people educate the non-Indigenous people on an education that they didn't get when they were going through the school. The curriculum didn't include Indigenous people, didn't include our history, didn't include anything, and now we're expected to come into the school system and educate people who haven't are not willing to even provide the resources for 69 communities in a land base as large as France that only has one school. It just doesn't make sense when you begin to sort it out. So there's always a lot of thought about declaring. You know, the dominant culture always declares we should do something about this, but they never do. We have whole communities that are suffering from the poor housing, bad no employment, have to boil the water and everything, and so then people say, "Well, why don't they just leave? Just leave and do what we immigrants did." Well, we can't leave our own country. We can't immigrate. There is no place to immigrate to. There's no place across the ocean for us to go to. And even if we wanted to have that experience that immigrants have in Canada, we don't have an immigration process to go through to be declared Canadian citizens. We are still subject to the Department of Indigenous Affairs from the federal government, who denies us the very freedoms that every other Canadian experiences, and then wonders what the problem is.
Wow. A lot to think about. I was going to say that's the last question, but I'd love to just follow up with that. just one thing, because I know I can ask. What can we do for individuals here and each one of us tuning in who, you know, if people are watching, they're here because they care. Is there anything that you can share, that you could offer, that we can do to try to shift the narrative or try to make Turtle Island and the experience of Indigenous peoples better?
Well, one thing is to support the Indigenous self-determination, and to support the fact that we, under the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights and Freedoms, we have rights that even the Supreme Court has said, yes, Indigenous people have the right to self-determination. Indigenous people have the right to share in the dish with one spoon with the resources. But just because the right is there, if no one is willing to enforce that right, the government always says, well, it's okay for the Supreme Court to say that you have rights. Well, let them enforce the rights, because we're not going to. And it's proven itself out time and time again. The lobster fishermen on the East Coast just wanting to have enough lobsters to have a living, and these organizations and fish marketing people and so on came down hard on a people just to want to share in the dish with one spoon that we shared with no problem whatsoever when the 400 years ago, when the settlers first came. There is so much that needs to be done, and it needs to have a dialogue and respect between the dominant culture and the Indigenous culture. And I have in the Indigenous world, the definition of love is when another person's happiness is essential to your own happiness. Well, unfortunately, the happiness of the dominant culture is the happiness of Indigenous people is not essential to the happiness of the dominant culture. It doesn't matter whether we suffer. It doesn't matter whether we have the highest suicide rates. It doesn't matter that we have systemic racism, because it doesn't matter, because our happiness is not essential to the dominant culture's happiness. However, our survival depends on their happiness. Our happiness is predicated upon the dominant culture being happy with us, and often only being happy with us is if we capitulate and assimilate, and then they're happy. It's when the dominant culture and the people in the dominant culture begin to love, and their happiness is our happiness is essential to theirs, will there be any change?
Beautiful final words, Duke. Thank you. It's the opportunity to learn from you. On this festival, there's a few other Indigenous panelists, BIPOC creators, panelists, idea makers that are going to be sharing. And so I'd like to invite Mel back to help us finish off tonight, as we'll still let you have the last word, of course, Duke, because there's no better way to finish than to just glean a little more of that wisdom. So thank you so much again. And thank you, Mel, for having us.
It's an absolute. I don't know why I said I should come back, Duke. That was so urgent, and I'm going to have to watch it again to get the fullness of it. Thank you both so much for spending this afternoon with us, and to everyone out there who spent your time. Yeah. Real punch in the gut, really. Thank you. It was great. Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'll leave everyone with this blessing, which is an old Indigenous prayer, which goes like this: O my mother, the earth, O my father, the sky, your children are we. And with tired backs, we bring to you the gifts that you love. Then weave for us a garment of brightness. May the weft be the white light of morning. May the warp be the red light of evening. May the border be the standing rainbow. And may the fringe be the falling rain. Then weave for us a garment of brightness, that we may fittingly walk where birds sing, that we may fittingly walk where grass is green. O my mother, the earth, O my father, the sky. Nekwach.